All right, today we're kicking off season 3 with our third creator spotlight. Joining us on this episode is Michael Watson, one of the co founders of Wikid Publishing, the host of Wikid Weekend podcast, and the creator and writer of the Black and White Barrels comic from Wikid. Why don't you say hello, Michael?
Thank you so much for having me, and hello to all the listeners out there. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, right on. We're glad to have you on. So, if you don't mind, we'll go ahead. We'll just jump right on into this. First, I want to talk a little bit about Wikid Publishing. I couldn't help but notice that Wikid Publishing and Omen Comics both started it in the same year in 2018. I was wondering if you could. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about the founding of Wikid Publishing with Matt Bryant. I mean, what started that journey?
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a great question. I'd love to tell you a little bit about that. So basically, the story goes back to I think 26. I want to say 2016, when me and Matt were working at Office Depot, and that's how me and Matt met together. Was working through there, and so I always knew he was an artist, and I've always been a writer, and so when I left that job, I kind of had this idea to start a comic, and so I reached out to Matt, and we decided to create Project R, which is our first comic that we made, and we spent about 6 months kind of coming up with a story, the character, the concepts, all the philosophical and deeper meanings that we wanted to convey in the series, because we wanted this to be kind of like a big epic. And so then once we did that, we came up with our first chapter, and we debuted it at San Francisco Comic-Con, I want to say 2017. Yeah, 2017 was when we debuted the first chapter.
Nice.
And we got pretty good results, and we had a lot of fun at that convention. It kind of just made us want to do it even more. And so then the following year, towards the beginning of that year, and maybe even at the end of that 2017, we decided we wanted to expand out and not only put our own books out, but try to start helping other creators too. And so that's when the idea for a publishing company came about. And Matt brought back an old name that he had come up with, Wikid Publishing, a long time ago, independent of myself, and so we settled on that name. Originally, it was Project R Manga was the name of the company, but then we eventually transitioned into Wikid Publishing, because when we decided that we were going to expand out from our own comic and do others as well. And so the first person that we signed on and met and interacted with online was Cody Fernandez from Jack Irons.
Nice.
Awesome.
And so that was a match made in heaven. We owe a lot to Cody for helping us get started and building our early fan base when we were just getting started and nobody knew who we were. And so we signed him on, and then we quickly signed on Ebi Canals from Decimators and several other great creators who started to bolster our rankings. And from there, just been plugging away ever since, doing conventions, and currently working on trying to get distribution for all the great creators we have under our banner.
Sweet. That's a nice origin story. How many creators you got under the Wikid Publishing banner
now? That's a great question. Off the top of, I'd say it's probably around a dozen. Without specifically counting, but I think we have about a dozen right now. I want to say. I'm bad with math, so don't quote me on that.
That sounds good, and everybody we've talked about, I mean, they're just great guys, so we're glad to be part of that, and I would say we consider ourselves among that number too. So
definitely, yes, of course, yeah. And speaking of which, we just put out the new Omen books just got put up on the Wikid store today.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So you can get Omen #1, Blitz #1, Michael Nero, or rather White Druid and Michael Nero #1, and also Galisman #1 as well. Yeah.
And all of it, if you want to get under the ground floor with any of our books, those are definitely good places to start. So check it out.
Right.
Yeah. So speaking of, that's a really good segue, actually. What do you look for in a book for Wikid Publishing? Are there any particular things that define what a Wikid title is for you?
That's a really interesting question. No one's ever quite asked it before, but so there's a few things that we look for. One is we like to be a place where anyone who loves comics can find a book for them. So we really love diversity in genres, styles, and maturity levels. So we want, if anything from all ages to teen to mature, we like to cater to a variety of audiences. So that is something that we're always considering in mind, is trying to keep variety as part of the core, I think. But in terms of individual titles, we look for something that speaks to us. So if a story speaks to us, a character speaks to us, an art style speak to us. We look for something that can make itself stand out from the rest of the books that we're looking at and really make an impression on us. And so I think it's more in terms of how we're feeling and then less in terms of genres and things like that. It really is about the feeling we get from meeting with the creator and hearing about their story ideas, getting a sense for what the comic is all about, I think.
That's pretty sweet. So I mean, really, it's just about good, unique style stories for you, really.
I think so. Yeah, I think in unique stories and then in good stories. I think it's kind of like you hear it in a variety of different things, but like when you see it, kind of thing. Like there's something about a good story that just draws you in from a reader's perspective. So I think we come at it from like being passionate readers and creators ourselves. That when we see a story idea we just love, we're like, okay, yeah, that's the one. Yeah, we need to have them on here with us.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get into our discussion about your Barrels comic.
Sweet.
First of all, I just want to say both your name, Michael, is a very cool name. I just like it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I like that name too. It's a good one.
Not so much when I had to tell both of you apart, but yeah.
Yeah, really.
But seriously though, I really like the name Barrels for the series. I mean, two images come to mind with that title. I mean, barrels of alcohol and barrels on the guns and rifles.
You nailed it, man.
Just with the name, you set up the whole mood for the story.
Thank you so much. That's so funny because I knew I wanted to do a 1920s mafia comic, and then it all came together when they hit me with that title. And you're exactly right. It was like, yeah, barrels of alcohol, barrels of the gun. It's like, oh man, it's like goes hand in hand. Like, oh man, this title is perfect for me. This is like amazing. And
for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and it really did and it really informed a lot of the story, like the fact that they're bootleggers, like all that stuff. Like it comes from the idea of, oh well, it's not just gun barrels, it has to be alcohol barrels. I really try to incorporate both those elements into the story.
Gun and beer, the two things that go great together.
Yes.
Yeah. I was kind of curious, what actually attracts you to 1920s New York as a setting? I know that we've talked about The Great Gatsby before, and that book also deals with prohibition and organized crime as a background element. So from that, I could definitely tell that you're really passionate about the Roaring '20s and the Prohibition era. Is there something that draws you to that time period and to gangster stories?
That's really interesting too. So. Yeah, I think there's a few different things that come to mind when I hear that question, and it's like I grew up on watching a lot of the gangster movies, like the classics. My dad would always show me the older movies, like Miller's Crossing, or The Godfather, or whatever, Scarface, and so there was something about, I think what it really comes down to me for why I love the 1920s so much is that it feels at the same time foreign and unfamiliar because it's set in the past in a time is gone now, but yet it's still close enough that things feel familiar as well. And so it's this interesting mix of the modern and the old colliding into this land of kind of, especially in America, this lawlessness and this new age of technology and new wonders and just all this crazy stuff going on and with the crime. And so it's just a really interesting time in history where it is so unlike things that now, but it is similar, and like I said, and so it's just, to me, it's just a fascinating time. And I think just the black and white, like you throw a black and white image up and it's like, oh man, it gives you, it makes you feel like, oh man, we're stepping into a different time period. This is like going into a whole different area. And so it's interesting to me.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. My interest in westerns is actually not too similar, not too different from that. So I completely get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
So, what are your influences in terms of how you approach a good crime story? Are there any that influence your process on Barrels?
I apologize. What was that? Can you repeat that question for me?
Yeah. What are your influences? Like, are there any specific stories that inspired you to write Barrels, or how do you approach a good crime story in your view?
Yeah, definitely. So there were a few that really, influenced me. I Godfather, of course, is always going to be a classic, and I went back and I rewatched the whole trilogy when the new cut of the third movie came out. He put out like a coda version, and so I kind of watched it all three again, and so that is a big part of it. I think the way I look at it is the other story is that I'm inspired by It's probably, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it or if you know about the series. It's called Baccano, Baccano, but it's a Japanese light novel, and they have an anime for it as well. But it's essentially a 1920s mafia anime, slash series, and it's about immortals. So they were in the 1700s. They drank an elixir to make them immortal, and now it's this crazy story of immortals and gangsters and demons and all this crazy stuff that's going on. And so that was a big inspiration for me. And then, because they have like a huge cast of characters that you just want to fall in love with, and it's just so much fun, these adventures with these characters. And so I kind of took that inspiration mixed with a little more of the grounding of like the realism of like The Godfather, where it is more grounded in what was real history and what could really be. There's no demons, there's no morals, anything like that. And so
I did get a vibe of Godfather Part 2 at the beginning.
Really? Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I love that, man. I'm glad to hear that, because I really wanted to give you that feel of like, oh, these are some interesting characters we're coming into. We're going to find out what their deal is. They have a lot of baggage that we don't know about yet. We're going to find out about through the series. But the story kind of came together all at once. Like, I knew who Tommy was. I knew what had happened to him. I knew where he was going, and I kind of knew where he was going to end up too. So it all kind of came together really quickly.
That sounds pretty cool. I really like the sound of that one series, but I gotta ask you. I mean, I gotta ask all Godfather fans this. Is it 1 or 2 for you that is the best, or are you a 3 fan?
See, here's the thing. I think 1 will always be my favorite. 1 is just like the classics, like, oh, that's The Godfather. But I love all 3 of them. I think especially now that the coda has come out for number 3, I think the coda version is a lot better. It cuts out a lot of the extraneous, boring, kind of more boring scenes that were tied down in minutia, and it really focuses on the characters and the story more. So I do think the third cut, if you haven't seen the coda cut of that, it's definitely worth watching. Kind of weird though, they spoil the ending in the title, so if you haven't seen it, that's kind of weird. But
I'm gonna have to check out that coda cut. I haven't.
Yeah, it's pretty sick.
I still need to see that.
Yeah, it came out last year. I think it was last year, I want to say. Yeah.
So I gotta say, I really like the flow of the series. You really use the dialogue well when it comes to like keeping the story going and delivering information. I also like that despite it being a black and white comic, we still get a little gore with the bones on the windshield in page 16 on issue number 1. I like the little immolation with the Molotov cocktail on
that was pretty sweet. I was having fun with that one. I was like, my goal with that was like to set up the story in the beginning with these characters that you're like, oh, these seem like cool characters. Like, what's going on here? Oh, they're gonna do a little job or whatever, and then all of a sudden the shit hit the. Oh, sorry, can I curse on here? I'm not sure if sorry, the shit hits the fan, and I'm like, oh. Okay, I wanted it to be like a pop-off moment where it's like, oh wow, things are really heating up really quickly, like, and so to me that was like my opening act was like this big action scene that ends with a big twist.
Right. I don't know if you ever read the Punisher Max Kitchen Irish.
No, I haven't. I've not read that one.
Okay, well, your character Sabatini the Butcher totally comes across like a Garth Ennis character. And
oh my god, that's amazing! Oh my god, thank you so much. That's actually, I love that praise, because Garth Ennis is pretty much my number 1, number 2 writer. Like I absolutely adore Garth Ennis.
Awesome.
That's great to hear.
In case that's not clear, that's a pretty damn high compliment for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I mean that exactly.
Punisher Max is the best. Man. So yeah, I'm
really. I will have to pick that one up. That is not one I've read from, but I will. I'm currently reading The Boys right now.
Yes.
Which is amazing.
There is an older guy that is who does torture and disposing of bodies
in the Garth Ennis Punisher Max.
It just totally reminded me of that Sabatini.
So I will say I'm reminded of Garth Ennis in another way. I don't know if you've read any of his war comics, but I find that Garth Ennis in his war comics usually does a really, really good job of researching and like showing his work. And I see a lot of that in this as well. So one thing I really like about these issues is the backup sections with all the 1920s history notes at the end. Because I find that they're really helpful for getting context about what was going on and all the major players that you're writing about. Can you talk about the research process for the series and how you develop the backup sections?
Yeah, dude, that's really cool. Thank you so much for saying that, because yeah, I really love putting the history sections. That's actually something that's, for all my historical comics, has become kind of a staple for me. It's so it started with Project R. I would put these sections in the back of the chapters about ancient Rome, and again, kind of like you said, to give that context of what's going on in that chapter and what what historical elements might be at play. And so that was something I started in Project R. And when I started Barrels, I was like, okay, I think I want to carry that over. That was actually really fun to do that and tell people about. And so the story of the comic essentially is well, it's obviously fiction, but it's very much fantasy, because the two organizations who are feuding, having this big kind of mafia war, were two organizations that really existed in history. It was the Morello crime family and the Camoras, and they had a big war, and the Morello crime family essentially destroyed the Camoras completely. And so in my book, and again taking kind of partial inspiration from Baccano, because they talk about the Camorra in there. That's where I first got introduced to that organization. In my book, there's a small section of the Camorra who have essentially tried to come out and have a resurgence of the group. And so it's me taking some of the history that really happened and then taking my spin on it. And so in the back of the book, I talk about the real history of the organizations, and I even mentioned, like, I talk about how that they were destroyed and how that part of the book is fiction. So in the back, I like to talk about, here's the real history, and here are some of the one or two elements I may have put in that are my own fiction. So I try to make it clear where the line between history and fiction is, so that people will leave the book knowing what's real and what isn't.
So really, you could call Barrels a historical fiction then, especially because you're bringing up the specific histories and stuff in the back and whatnot.
Exactly, yeah, that's right. And playing with some of those historical players, like the head of the Morello crime family is Joe the Boss Masseria. He was a real guy, and his goal was to take over all of New York, and he wanted to own, basically be the head of all the 5 crime families and own New York. So he was very ambitious. But we go into the history of like how he got, what his deal is, his organization. We talk about some of the, the Camorra. And what's interesting too is a lot of these, many of you probably know this already, but most of or pretty much all these crime families that were prevalent at the time were coming in from like places like Italy, Naples and things like that. So these organizations had long histories already in Italy and other countries. And so these are massive organizations that are saying, oh, look at America, this booming new country. We're going to go over there and try and make our mark and make some more money here. And so that's why you see a lot of these, all of a sudden in the 1920s, there's the rise of organized crime, is because the Volstead Act, the Prohibition begins and alcohol is outlawed, and that just became a booming sales for all these organized crime, and they just became immensely, incredibly powerful to the point
unintended consequences.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Unintended consequences. Exactly, man. That's right. Yeah.
And they definitely did leave their mark. I mean, the mafia basically was in control until like what, the 90s?
Yeah, I mean, that's the crazy part. A lot of people think of, after the 1920s, the mafia goes away, but it doesn't. It really it changes. Like once Prohibition gets ended, they move into other rackets. That's always been their thing, like, gambling and other kind of things, So and then you got things like Murder Inc. start forming and the Commission. And so it's like the organized crimers were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It was just becoming even more, complicated. So it's fascinating history from the 1920s, all the, like you said, even for the many decades that followed. It just is a fascinating history.
Yeah. Good stuff. I want to go into a little bit about the making of it. It looks like, and I hope I'm saying this rightly. It looks like Jeff Lasley. Is that it?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, he's self-described hillbilly who lives on top of a hill. So that's his definition, not mine. But he's a great guy. He lives, I think he's in Tennessee, but he comes from a very traditional background of of art. He started off doing, he does beautiful, gorgeous paintings, these amazingly detailed paintings. And so he's a landscape guy, a painting guy, but he loves horror. He loves aliens. That's his, like, creepy supernatural stuff is his bread and butter. So this was definitely a big turn for him, and he never done anything like this project. And so for him, I think it was, he thought of it as good practice because he's doing all these buildings and cars and historical stuff. And I wasn't, like we talked about the research, right? Part of my script working when I do historical stuff like this is I do the research not only on, what events and people were around, but I look at the clothing, I look at the cars, I look at the technology, I look at the buildings, and I provide reference images to the artists. So, because I like in my historical comics, I really do, I do appreciate accuracy. And so, like, he's having to draw things he's never seen, but he's also doing research on his own, bringing things in. And so it turned out to be an incredible collaboration between the two of us. And I really feel like he captured the 1920s so well, and I just couldn't be happier with working with Jeff.
So it looks like on all 4 comics, you got Jeff doing your art and Frank doing the lettering. How did you guys all meet up?
Yeah, that's a wild story. So me and Jeff, I think, is the more interesting story, just because I was looking online, and this was a number of years back, and Wikid Publishing I think was maybe a couple years in, and we were working with this guy named Nashitobi, who was kind of acting as a bit of an advisor to us before he kind of got too busy and kind of went on to do his own projects. But so I was looking for artists, and I was just asking, you got any suggestions? And he threw a bunch of people my way, and one of them was Jeff. And I immediately fell in love with the art, and so I reached out to him. I was like, hey, do you want to do this comic called Barrels? Like, we had a phone conversation to talk about it. And I was like, I got this idea for Barrels. It's going to be this epic comic, 20 issues. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be He's like, oh man, I don't think I can commit to 20 issues. That's a lot of issues. I was like, he's like, if you need to go find another artist, I totally understand. I was like, no, I don't want to lose. I can do shorter. So I was like, I'll do 4 issues. We'll do. How can you commit to 4 issues? And he's like, yeah, I can do that. And so I reworked the story, and I actually think it's a lot better now. I think it would have been too bloated at 20 issues. At 4 issues, it turned out to be the perfect length, and I'm so happy that we decided to go it that way. But that's how we met. We ended up just meeting kind of over Twitter, over social media. Crank, the letterer, he was a little different. I want to say, I don't know. Actually, I either found him through Twitter or through email or somehow. But he's an interesting guy. He's done publishing stuff. I want to say, do you guys know who does the Rick and Morty comics? Shoot.
Not off the
top of my head, sorry.
Oh, I want to say Omni, maybe? Omni, okay. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them. It's either them or IDW. I can't remember. But he does all the lettering for the Rick and Morty comics. And so somehow I found him without even knowing that. Like, I found that out later. I was like, oh shit, my letter does Rick and Morty comics. That's pretty cool. But so he just goes by the name Crank, and we met, and I was like, the prices are good. Let's try it out. And he blew me away. Like, he can do color comics, he can do black and white comics, and just the level that he adds to it is just awesome. Like, he comes up with all the sound effects on his own. I just kind of put in like gunshot or shotgun or whatever it might be, and he comes up with the rest. He creates beautiful like lettering that, like, sometimes I don't even see. There's a great scene in Barrels where they kind of are toasting and they say salute, which is, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation, but that's essentially cheers in Italian. And he did this beautiful lettering just cascading down the side. It was so cool.
I remember that scene. Granted, they might pronounce it differently in different areas, but the Italians I've hung out with don't even pronounce the T or the E on the end.
Oh, really?
Just say salute.
That's funny. Yeah, that's the one thing I didn't do the research on, was the pronunciation there, but that is very interesting. Yeah, I would definitely picture that.
I have to say I really like the gunfights in the series. Nice. I mean, it feels so natural. Like you really feel like you're in the middle of a gunfight. Nice. Now, what my question is, how do you guys work that out? I mean, is that just something Lasley just has a talent for, or I mean, what's your creative process like when you're making that comic with it?
So that, I think it's probably a combination of both. So one thing I wanted to do when I kind of alluded earlier about mixing Godfather with Baccano. something that I love about Baccano is because it's kind of living in an anime-esque world or a manga-esque world, there's a lot of action. And so the fight scenes are really visceral, really cool. And where you don't really get that in your traditional gangster movie. That's, your traditional gangster movie is going to have quick action. It's going to have, a guy gets gunned down really quickly, or you might have a quick skirmish, but it's usually going to be over pretty quickly. So I wanted to bring in an element into a grounded, realistic mafia movie where it has those epic big action sequences, and it really feels exciting and different. And so that was an inspiration there. And so the action sequence, I just kind of put on some music, and I just come up like, okay, we got a couple guys here, let's go for it. And then I just kind of panel by panel think out what I'm like. For example, there's a panel like where he sneaks up behind, he's getting up gonna sneak up some guys, so he crouches behind a car and sneaks around it. And so I'll write up something like to Jeff, like, Tommy crouches down low behind the car so they can't see him and pulls out his knife to sneak around back. And he'll then take what I've said and he'll use his imagination and come up with the camera angles, the angles of the panel, whatever it might be, and the look of it. So I might come up with the idea, but then Jeff takes it from there and really makes it shine with his art and makes it really dynamic. And so I do think he does have a talent for that. He's very good with those action sequences, kind of translating what I'm thinking and hearing or seeing in my head.
Yeah, I think that definitely comes across. The other thing that I think really comes across, and I know we talked a little bit about this, is the fact that Barrels is a black and white comic. And I think that some are better than with color, but I think when we're talking 1920s crime drama, it definitely works with that. And I will say that at times, even as a feel of an old black and white film, which I know that you talk a little bit about films and how all that, but I've also seen a little bit of crime noir and film noir in there, and I think that Barrels dovetails very nicely into that. Was the black and white choice a conscious decision, or was it driven by other things, or even by the manga aspect?
Yeah, that's interesting. Thinking back on it, I know I don't think there was ever. Yeah, I think actually it was more of a conscious choice. I think with that one, it wasn't necessarily like where with other comics I've cut costs to doing black and white or maybe like flat colors to cut costs or something. With Barrels, I think it was from the outset. I was like, yeah, I want this to be like you said, like a black and white movie. I wanted to feel like immediately you pick up the first page and you're like, oh wow, it's again like I said earlier, like stepping into that different era. Like, oh, this isn't in the modern era anymore. Like I'm taking a step back into a forgotten time, into a place that I can only imagine of visiting. Which is so cool. That's what I love history in historical settings, is because it's like a view into something a place you can never visit in the real world. And I just love that it can transport you to literally a different place just by reading or watching something. So that was a big inspiration there, I think.
I think it comes across well like that. It really has that. It really has that flow to it. I can totally see that. I didn't pick it up like reading it the first time, but I can totally see that black and white film kind of thing going on with it.
Oh, that's great, man. I'm glad to hear that, because that was definitely something we wanted to bring across. And I think another thing that was really important for me was because I wanted that old style black. I wanted this to feel like an old black and white movie. I knew that I didn't want any digital art. I wanted it to be completely 100% traditional, because I wanted and so Jeff he did this whole series, I think, with maybe towards the end 1 or 2 pages were digital, but pretty much the entire series he did hand drawn, hand inked, and everything. And I think to me it shows it really has an authentic quality to it that that I'm not sure would have come across it in digital the same way.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
It's awesome, yeah.
So I gotta ask you about this the Tommy Gallo character. I don't know if you've read the Vampire Chronicles.
No, I have not.
But reading Tommy Gallo's story is similar to how I felt about the Vampire Lestat after reading Interview with the Vampire. At first, I didn't like Tommy at all. He was
Interview with the Vampire. I'm sorry to interrupt you there. I was going to say, so that's part of that series, right? Interview with the Vampire?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's the narrator for most of the series.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I didn't like Tommy at first. He was hot-headed. He was screwing up everything for everybody else, just like I didn't initially like Lestat. But as the story filled in, I got to know Tommy a bit more, and he grew on me. And just like in the Vampire Chronicles, by book 2, Tommy was the hero in the story.
Oh wow.
I think my favorite issue in the series has to be number 4. I mean, it's
nice.
probably because of the 3 that preceded it. You know, it all builds up to that. But that one was definitely my favorite in the series. I was wondering what you could tell us about that issue without spoiling anything, since it hasn't been released yet.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite issue too. It's the final issue, and so there's a lot of sentimentality for me there. It was pretty much like, not the first comic I started, but it's the first comic I finished, and so it's been an incredible journey and experience to start and complete a whole comic. But with the fourth issue, it was like I sat there and I was like, okay, I want to bring full circle everything that we've read in the first 3 issues. I want it to come to around, and I want it to feel very satisfying for the reader. So I tried to bring back all the elements. I tried to answer all the questions. And I just wanted to be a damn good time. I was like, we got to go out with a bang. I mean, this is Barrels, right? So we got to go out with a bang. So I crafted, I'm really happy with the way the events in the first 3 issues turned out. And because, like I said, I knew where the story was going, and I kind of knew where it was ending, but I didn't quite know where it was going to go. And so issue 4 was something I came up with after digesting all 3 issues and saying, oh, and now I see what the ending is. Okay, here we go. And so then I was able to go in and write it, and it was the biggest issue of all 4 of them because there was just so much to cover. There's some flashbacks to just the epic finale, and I just really pleased with the ending. Like I'm so happy with how it ended. Like I won't spoil anything, but like I just think the art, the lettering, everything came together, and just I'm very pleased with the ending of the story.
It was satisfying for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's always a big thing. Now, from reading the issues, and I have to admit I have not read the finale, so
we won't spoil it.
Yeah, I will say I get the feeling that, or at least from reading the first 3 issues, was that the story of Barrels really revolves a lot around the cycle of violence and revenge and where that leads. There are other things involved in it as well, but I feel like the human drama really drives it, with Tommy losing a lot of people in his life, and that haunts him, and that drives him towards doing the things that he does. But even we see that even with the Morellos. So was the idea of revenge and its consequences an intentional theme on your part? And is there something that you were trying to say about revenge through the story, or was that something that just came together because of the story you're telling and the theme just came from that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it was definitely a conscious choice on my part. It's something that I've been thinking about for a long time. It kind of first started when I was watching Naruto. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that show, but that's kind of a big theme in the series is the idea of peace, revenge, pain, a lot of these different kind of concepts. And so I started off with just wanting to make a revenge story, I think was the initial idea. And I started writing that action scene, the first one. And then the big twist came to me. I said, oh, wait, this isn't a revenge story. This is a story about how revenge corrupts people. I said, oh, I didn't realize that maybe at first, but those kind of themes about, peace, and there's something that I really want to write about. It's something that I want to focus on in my writing, I think, going forward. And so, yeah, I think that was definitely a conscious thing for me to want to do that because, I don't know, it's like you see all these revenge stories like Taken and all these different things, and even Taken 2 kind of tries to address it a little bit, I think. But just the idea of the cycle of revenge repeating, it's a very compelling idea. Like everybody has been hurt and has wanted to hurt in return, which is something Naruto talks about. When you get hurt, you want to hurt, and if you hurt people, you know what I mean, like you just hurt more, and so it's just, but it's through this pain that we learn to grow up and have compassion for other people. And so I think definitely I wanted to try and tell a meaningful story while still having a good time, but really tell kind of what was on my mind, really.
I think you hit it there. You can definitely see those elements and those themes throughout the story. I mean, I would say even especially at the beginning in that first issue there, I would say that the search for revenge will not just hurt you, but it can even hurt those around you.
Exactly. Yeah, and the unintended consequences, kind of like I think what you were saying earlier.
Yep.
Steve. Yeah.
These violence delights have violent ends, to quote Westworld.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah.
So I gotta ask one more question about well, you said that issue 4 of Barrels was going to be the last one, but I mean, there's a lot of stories to tell in the Prohibition era, doing with this kind of theme that you're doing with Barrels. I mean, is there any future for the series? I mean,
That's interesting. We talked a little about would we want to come back and do another one down the line, and Jeff said maybe I'm working on my own stuff for now, but who knows in the future. I could always get a new artist too if Jeff couldn't do it. But one thing I really thought about doing is actually moving away from the Prohibition era a little bit and doing my Godfather 2 and go back to Italy when Tommy was just a kid and do something more about his father, because in the third issue we learn a little bit more about his father, how Tommy lived in Italy before moving to the United States, and how his father was involved in crime and how essentially he gets him started on his path towards crime in a way. And so
that would be kind of cool. I really, I mean, in that issue, they really just kind of hint at that, really, with I just don't want you to have to live your life like I did, or however he says that there. I mean, that'd be a really cool area to explore there, I think.
Yeah, that flashback was where I really started having Godfather vibes.
Yeah. I think I wrote that after just rewatching the Godfather series again. I'm pretty sure, yeah. So that definitely makes sense. But yeah, I mean that is kind of like that's what fascinates me about the switch from Godfather 1 to Godfather 2 is just the passing of the torch and seeing things from a different perspective, and so I love that idea. So I kind of wanted to do something similar where we're kind of seeing things from a different character's perspective now. So yeah, I think that would be kind of fun. Maybe doing a prequel, like a one-shot prequel, I think would be cool. Or like you said, like even a spin-off like Barrels and then give it a subtitle or something.
What about like a 0 issue?
Like a more pre-story on Tommy, maybe even.
Yeah, like you got Barrels 1 through 4. A lot of times when they're gonna bust out a prequel, they make a 0 issue for it.
Oh, I see what you mean. I feel
like the story of how Tommy got thrown into prison would be something that's worth exploring someday.
Yeah, something to flesh that out and see. Yeah, that's true. That is interesting because we kind of only allude to it in the original or in the series rather, where it's like they had the original Camorra Mafia War that they lost, and they're like, oh, but we want to come back. But it would be interesting to kind of see what was that war about? How did that go down?
Right. I'm curious, actually, as I mentioned already that Tommy's father didn't want him to live the same life that he did, but Tommy clearly got wrapped up in all that.
Exactly, and then something I wanted to. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'd like to find out where that. I mean, as a child, when your dad says something like that to you, I mean, I assume that probably meant something to him, right? But there's got to be a story behind how he ended up going from "All right, Dad, I won't do that" to gangster.
Yeah, well, definitely.
Once I thought I was out, you threw me back in.
Yeah, really. Yeah, really. But one thing I actually wanted to. That was actually a big, and that's funny. It's like you could do a whole series on that, but something I really wanted to convey with that idea was that like you said, this tragic things happen, something is said, right, and you think he would listen to this advice, right? But I love the idea of the repeating cycles, because that goes into the repeating cycles of violence and revenge kind of theme that I was trying to go for, which is that despite someone's best intentions of trying to make their children not turn out how they are, oftentimes we see that they end up just like them anyway. And so it's just kind of this tragic thing where like, yeah, he could have been turned away from there, but because of what happened, he kind of just ended up there anyway.
It totally reminds me of I don't know, maybe I'm showing my age here, but they used to have these commercials where a kid would get busted doing drugs or smoking cigarettes or something, and the parents would be, "Oh, why'd you do that? Where'd you learn how to do that?" And he says, "From you, Dad. I learned it from."
Yep, pretty much, yep.
I'm getting Tony Soprano flashbacks as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, many sakes of Newark is still in my head.
That's fair. Yeah, I still need to catch that one, but I've heard good things on that one, so I'll probably be watching that soon myself.
Yeah, if you like The Sopranos, you will love Many Saints of Newark. That's a good movie.
That's awesome, man. Yeah.
So that about wraps up our questions for this episode. I mean, is there anything you would like to talk about, or anything we missed, or announcements?
Wow, no,
or
I mean,
anything you'd like to make?
you guys have covered quite a great many topics, and it's been such a fun conversation. I guess all that I could say is you know, if you read it out there, I hope you've enjoyed it, because it's been a blast making it for me. Just from the historical research to just coming up with these fun characters and throwing them these crazy scenarios. And you know, even issue 2, I was able to do a little bit of a horror scene. You talked about Sabatini the Butcher, so I threw a little bit of a horror scene in there. And Jeff, excuse me, he switched up to like these darker inks when he was, you know, doing it. So like, I don't know, there's just I think there's a lot of fun stuff in here. I wanted to feel like an old 1920s mafia movie, so I hope I've done my job.
Oh, okay. Well, one last question before we let you go. Why don't you tell people where they can find you and your books online?
Thank you so much. So yes, if you want to follow me personally on Twitter, I'm at Nubguy, NUBGUY, or you can follow our Wikid Publishing company at Wikid Publishing, WIKID Publishing. And if you want to go check out all our books, we're at wikidpublishing.net, and we have a store on there where you can buy all the current books we have in physical and in digital. We've got some merch up there, like posters and prints. We even got an action figure with more on the way, or not action figure, like a figurine more like. But yeah, we got a lot of cool stuff up there, and you can find out all about the different series we published, including the Omen comics, which we just put out on the store. So check that out and go find out all the cool stuff we got coming out soon.
One thing we totally forgot to ask about is when is Barrels #4 coming out?
Oh, yes, that's a good question. So we're actually heading to the printer with Barrels #4 and a few other comics this month. So we're proofing and hopefully out by the end of this month, or maybe early sometime next month.
Awesome.
Great.
Thanks for joining us on another Indie Comics Creator Spotlight here on ORP, and we'll see you for another one next month. But you'll hear from us again this Tuesday with our discussion on the philosophical side of science fiction.